You're listening to the Greeks Gridiron. Now here's your host, Ethan Haristadoulou.
Welcome back, everybody, to the Greeks Gridiron. I am Ethan Haristadoulou, and a happy Friday to you all. It is that time again where we make our picks, this time for week number 9 of the UFL. 4 more games on tap as we do every weekend. Sunday's games will be happening at the same exact time again. So for those of you wondering, depending on where you live will determine which game you are able to see. So just keep that in mind on Sunday. If you're looking for that second UFL game, you're going to have to find it via other means. Wink, wink, elbow nudge there, if you know what I'm saying. But with that, we're on a 14-2 heater right now since week 5, killing the picks game. So I invite you all to comment down below. Let me hear your picks, your thoughts on mine, and we'll dive in with that first matchup being the St. Louis Battlehawks heading into Arlington to take on the Renegades. This one on Saturday at 12 p.m. Eastern time on ABC. The Renegades, after coming in, hot last week, riding off their first victory, offense kind of crashing and burning, going up against the San Antonio Brahmas. They now face a St. Louis Battlehawks defense that is kind of their kryptonite here, unfortunately, as they are the UFL's best passing defense here. So I do think that Arlington for this matchup should probably consider looking into running the football a little bit more and seeing what kind of damage they can do there. Allowing about 94 rushing yards per game, St. Louis has been known to let running backs get behind them, so that is something that I think the team should be considering and looking into. Like, I understand it's the Luis Perez show over there in Arlington, but in this scenario here, if you want to try to maybe find some momentum and just gain a little bit of credibility from this season, maybe get out of that one-win section that is kind of, lumped together with 3 teams right now, maybe see what you can do on the ground here. And Arlington did find decent success the first time these two teams matched up with about 71 yards on the ground and a couple of touchdowns. They only averaged 3.4 yards per carry, but overall, it was a solid effort. So if you can improve upon that, maybe you go from losing by 3 to potentially winning by 3, if you think about it that way. Especially now that we know A.J. McCarron's going to be active, but he's going to be set as the backup in here, so it looks like we'll probably get Manny Wilkins again at quarterback. That being said, when you look at what happened the first time around, this Arlington defense, it struggled all year long, and I mean, that first game, A.J. McCarron went for nearly 250 yards, couple of touchdown passes. Darius Shepard and Marcel Aitman totaled nearly 200 of those yards and caught both those touchdowns on Aitman's end. It was pretty much just it was who could just put up the most yards and points basically in that first time around. And then, I mean, you saw what Durant Mateo did on the ground. Obviously, he's not playing right now, but 104 yards for him on the ground with the touchdown, including that 41-yard run. That was a big killer for them. I think Arlington, just simply put, needs to keep things in front of them and not let these plays get behind them. Don't get overly aggressive here. Again, Manny Wilkins is not quite at the level of A.J. McCarron, so there is maybe a little bit more breathing room for you, I guess you could say, for a lack of a better term, as you go into this matchup here. But just try to keep things in front of you. Don't let too much get behind you. And I feel like if you could just focus on the little things as a defense here, you can at least keep yourself in it. On the Battlehawks end, with no A.J. McCarron, like I was saying, it's going to be Manny Wilkins leading the show here, and hopefully to another victory on St. Louis's end, because they want to make sure they can lock up that home field advantage throughout, as both they and the Brahmas are sitting at 6-2. The good news is that Arlington's defense has struggled this season, allowing the second most yards per game and the third most points per game. So simply just taking care of the football and leaning into your running backs is going to be the big play for you. Allowing 110 rushing yards per game and 4.5 yards per attempt, Don't be afraid to run the football against Arlington's defense here. They've struggled mightily with that, so I do think if you could just lean into that ground game, ground and pound a little bit, and just, help out Manny Wilkins. Don't force him to take more attempts than he needs to. You have yourself a good shot at winning this football game against the Renegades. On the defensive side of things with Arlington, I do think it's all about just slowing down Luis Perez. He is the guy that basically gets this offense going, and with Arlington being ranked 6th in rushing, you don't really have to worry too much about them there on the ground. So with that, St. Louis, they total, 2nd in pass breakups this season. On top of that, they have the 2nd lowest completion percentage allowed. And despite losing guys like linebacker Mike Rose or cornerback Brandon Sebastian over the last few weeks, they have still been a very competitive unit against the pass. And I don't really expect to see that changing over the next couple of weeks. I think that they have a lot of depth on that defense there, and they've been very effective against it. So not too worried about it. If you can slow down what Luis Perez is doing and maybe mitigate what he has going on for him in this matchup here, you should be riding pretty comfortably. And with that, I do think game probably winds up being fairly close, similar to that first time around, especially with Manny Wilkins under center for St. Louis. I know that, Renegades defense hasn't been great. They allow a decent amount of points weekly, and that is something to keep in mind. But I do think that maybe the Renegades keep this one a little bit closer, but I expect that the Battlehawks come out victorious in this matchup here, and I have them winning 21-19. Closer affair, but I do think St. Louis still comes away with the win. The second game that we're looking at here is going to be the Birmingham Stallions heading into San Antonio to take on the Brahmas. This one's going to be at 3 p.m. Eastern time, also on ABC. As the Brahmas, they come in, playoff hopes obviously secured now, but an opportunity, depending on what happens with St. Louis, to maybe find yourself as the number 1 seed and host the XFL conference side of things. So you got to come into this game, you got to win. And how do you do that? On the defensive side, best pass rush in the UFL right now. You are leading with 26 sacks. You must stop Adrian Martinez. You got to find a balance, though. This is a very aggressive defense, and they are known for getting after the quarterback, but you have to keep him contained, and you have to make sure that the pressure does not get too crazy that you wind up blowing your contain and allowing Adrian Martinez to just completely dominate you on the ground here. The pass rush has been phenomenal, and I think one of the biggest things that I've noticed about them week in and week out is that they have sometimes sometimes they start to get a little too aggressive, and I feel like things just kind of get behind them. They allow running backs to blow past them because they're just so hell-bent on getting after the quarterback. And again, it's great to watch, but when you're going up against a guy like Adrian Martinez, who's literally coming off of a 5-touchdown game as recently as last weekend, he's your biggest threat. You have to be able to disrupt him, but you also have to make sure that you are keeping him contained, because he will obviously beat you with his arm. He's proved that over the last few weeks, but he will kill you with his legs if you give him the opportunity. On the offensive side of things, when you look at no running back John Lovett this week, you're going to have to lean on Anthony McFarland, and I do think that is something you want to think about doing. Houston last week showed that there is a possibility of running the football effectively against Birmingham, and you could point to maybe some injuries as to why maybe some of that happened, but there was definitely a formula that Houston figured out, and I think by taking a look at what they did there and applying that to your team this week, you might be able to find some similar success, especially with Anthony McFarland, who is just so talented with the football in his hands, especially when he's in open space. So try to get the football in his hands, force Birmingham to respect what you're doing on the ground, and hopefully this opens things up for Quentin Dormady, who has had a bit of an up and down, I would say, season so far. He kind of started high, dipped down for a little bit, had a good bounce back last week. So opening up the passing game by using your ground attack might be the best way and biggest opportunity for San Antonio to potentially come away with a win here against the undefeated Birmingham Stallions. On the Stallions end, I think keeping San Antonio guessing on defense is probably the best way to go. Keep the play calling quick, keep it varied, do not fall into too much of a rhythm and too much of just an obvious type of play call. I think that, as I mentioned with San Antonio, them being so aggressive, you can use that against them. And if you vary the play calling enough that they're not necessarily sure whether this is a passing down for Birmingham or whether it's a running down for Birmingham, if you can keep them guessing, you can kind of force them to react instead of attack, and that's probably the way you want to get things going. Martinez loves to obviously hit those big throws, but just keep things quick. Get the football out of his hands as fast as he can. Obviously, if he needs to extend a play, he's going to do it, but focus on just shorter, more intermediate throws and just try to get the football out quick. That's the best way to try to mitigate what San Antonio likes to do on defense. RPOs, maybe some quick play actions, things like that. Just force San Antonio to have to react rather than just straight up attack on you, and you should be able to get away with some good plays. Defensively, you're still missing guys in the secondary like cornerback Mark Gilbert, and JoJo Tillery's missing in this matchup as well. So I do think looking at the trenches and that defensive front, you're going to have to rely on them to be successful here. San Antonio's offensive line has been very good this season. They've allowed the fewest sacks on the year with only 12, and they have found success opening up running lanes as of late. So I do think that looking at your defensive front and telling them, we're going to rely on you, especially when you're a little bit banged up on the back end of that defense there, it's going to be up to guys like Dondrea Tillman and Carlos Davis to really set the tone early and, let San Antonio know we're 8-0 for a reason, and we're not going to let you come in and push us around, because again, San Antonio is a really good team up front on the offensive line. So I do think that whoever winds up winning that specific matchup, San Antonio's O-line versus Birmingham's defensive line, may dictate the outcome of this game here. That being said, as for who I think is going to come out victorious in this matchup, I think this one could be interesting. I'm not really sure where the scoreline is going to go because it really depends on just how good these defenses wind up playing this weekend, because this could be a low-scoring, kind of grinded out type of matchup, or maybe this is where defenses start to get a little bit overwhelmed. Maybe it's, looking towards the playoffs type of thing. I feel like Birmingham might have got caught doing that a little bit last week. San Antonio, though, they still have a lot to prove. They still have a lot that they could potentially lock up here, whereas Birmingham kind of feels like they're coasting to the finish line, but they do still want that undefeated season. So it really just kind of depends on how things shake out. But right now, as it stands, I am looking at a Stallions victory, and I have them winning 26-20. So I think we'll see a decent amount of points. I don't think the score gets too out of hand here because, again, both these defenses are good. You got to respect what they're doing there. But I do think that these offenses may find some ways, and I wouldn't be shocked to see, like, Anthony McFarland maybe take a big one to the house, or someone from Birmingham, one of the 18,000 players they have on that offensive side that can blow the top off the defense at any moment. So I wouldn't expect the score to get too crazy high, but I think we could see some points. Now, moving into Sunday's games here, and again, my biggest gripe of this season has been the fact that we have had multiple games going on at the exact same time, both of Sunday's games on Fox at 2:30 p.m. Eastern. So a little bit frustrating with that. But what are you going to do? It is what it is. We are here. This is the matchup. This is the slate. This is what we have to work with. So we'll start first with the DC Defenders and the Memphis Showboats. This one in Memphis. And like I said, 2:30 p.m. Eastern time, you'll catch them on Fox. For the Defenders in this one here, offensively, if there was ever a week to give your running backs an opportunity to shine, this would be the week. While they are allowing only the third most rushing yards per game, Memphis allows a league-high 4.6 yards per attempt on the ground, which is tied for the most right now, and a league-high 14 rushing touchdowns, which I think is like, it's 4, I think, more than the team behind them. It might be 2. I'm forgetting if the team in second has 10 or 12, but 14, and they're leading the league by a decent margin. That being said, with Jordan Ta'amu having struggled the way he has this season, he's sitting at like a 55% completion rate. He has 11 touchdowns to 7 interceptions. Very 50-50 performances from him pretty much all season long. Leaning into your running backs and giving them more of an opportunity this week might help take some pressure off of Jordan Ta'amu and open up your passing game a little bit more, making things a little bit easier for Ta'amu. You have a pretty decent offensive line over there, at least when it comes to protecting the quarterback. So if you could just open up some things on the ground against a Memphis Showboats team who, yes, they're allowing only the third most yards per game on the ground, but are deceivingly worse than I think the numbers would actually show, don't be afraid to run the football. On the defensive side, I think with this, it's pretty simple. If you just kind of stick to your assignments, keep things in front of you, don't get too crazy, you don't even have to be too aggressive with Memphis, you should be fine. Memphis's offense has been bad all season long, to put it simply. And this is a team that finds ways to throw the football away. At this point, an average of twice per game here. I believe they're averaging technically like 2.1 turnovers per game right now, as they lead the league with 17 turnovers. And on top of that, a league high 36 sacks, which I believe is 14 ahead of the team that's in second right now. Memphis does enough to give this football game away. And if you just keep everything in front of you and just don't get too crazy on defense, stick to your assignments, that's to all the players, you should be all right. And DC's defense hasn't been great by any means this year, but again, Memphis's offense is just so mistake prone right now, and they're so willing to just give up big plays and blow things in certain spots. If you just play smart and stick to keeping everything in front of you, you should be all right. For the Showboats, defensively, I think up front, you have to try to find a way to disrupt Jordan Ta'amu. As I said, he's had an up and down season here, and this is a Memphis defense that has not really been great in terms of forcing turnovers by any means or anything like that. You have 1 interception on the season right now, but if you can force Jordan Ta'amu into a bad throw or two, you might get yourself an opportunity. Obviously, easier said than done for the Showboats. They only have 14 sacks this season. They don't create a ton of pressure. They're second fewest in the UFL, and on top of that, DC has a pretty good O-line, as I mentioned. 4th in sacks, but it's only at 15, so not bad by any means, considering they've played through 8 games. You're averaging about 2 sacks or so a game. Not terrible, technically under 2. So I do think that you've got to find a way to force Jordan Ta'amu into the situations that he's kind of struggled in, which was basically being put under pressure. And if you can shut down the run, which again has not been the forte of this defense in Memphis, you can force them into that situation where Ta'amu's pushing 30, 35 passing attempts. And typically when that's going on, things are are not going well for the DC defenders. Offensively, overall, if Memphis just can't find success this week, I don't really think there are any answers for this offense. DC allows the most rushing yards by anyone this entire season per game. They also allow the 4th most passing yards per game, and they are allowing currently the 2nd most points per game. This is basically second to you. That being said, the run defense has been the biggest point of, or biggest issue, I guess I should say, as far as defending goes for DC. You have Darius Victor in that backfield. If you can't open things up for him this week and help him find a little bit of success this week, I don't really know what else to say about the Showboats and their offensive struggles. So if you can't find success even on the ground, but you should be able to find success in some capacity through the air as well, just considering the way DC has been themselves this year, I don't really know what the answer is. And it's clear that this team obviously needs a massive reset this offseason already. But if you can't do anything this week and cross like the 20-point margin, which has been a very difficult endeavor for Memphis this entire season, I don't really know what the answer is at this point, other than just blow it all up and try it again next year. As for who I think comes out victorious here, I do think that this is one where it can go either way. It really is just a matter of, do you think this is maybe the week Memphis puts it all together and takes down a DC team that's been far from perfect themselves? Or do you like DC, who is a little bit better of a football team than Memphis is at this stage in the season here, especially being 3-5 in some of the close games that they've lost as well? I'm going to go with DC. I think that is the safe pick here, obviously. There is a piece of me that feels like maybe Memphis puts it all together and gets another win this weekend. I think if they were to do it against anyone, it is the defenders here. But I'm just, at this point, I have looked at Memphis as the worst team in the UFL for at least the last month and a half now. And if I think that they are the worst team, I don't really see how they're supposed to beat anyone that's above them. Obviously, any given Sunday is a real thing, but there's a lot going wrong with Memphis right now, so I'll take DC 22-17. I think, Memphis continues to struggle to get close to that 20-point margin that they've hardly been able to capture at all this season, so I'll take DC in this one. And then finally, last but certainly not least, we have ourselves the Michigan Panthers taking on the Houston Roughnecks here. Panthers 6-2, Roughnecks 1-7. For the Roughnecks, can they match their offensive success from last week? Michigan, by no means a slouch on defense. They are one of the better defenses in the UFL, especially against the run, second only to Birmingham. But after last week, you saw what we saw the success that I think Houston has had in them pretty much all season, but has not really given their running backs the opportunity to find that success. In a game against the best run defense by a significant margin in Birmingham, go back to the well. Try it again. Let me see more of TJ Pledger and Mark Thompson so you can open up the passing game a little bit more. 22 attempts, going for nearly 100 yards, couple of touchdowns as well. I mean, you're not too far off from 5 yards per carry last week, the way things went. So, I mean, give it to your running backs. See what they can do. I really think that Mark Thompson and TJ Pledger, very talented duo of running backs who have shown that over the last few years of spring football, just haven't quite gotten the opportunities I think they've needed to be able to get themselves going and really find success against some of the defenses they've gone up against. So I do think just going back to the run, open up the passing game, see what you can do this week. You're not really playing for anything other than spoiler at this point, so just see what you can get going here. You might surprise yourself. You had a lot of success last week, and you surprised a lot of people putting up 28 points against Birmingham. Michigan, though, as far as the offensive side of things goes and how the Roughnecks defense needs to attack it, while they're not quite Birmingham, I think that if you can tighten up a little bit this weekend, you might have yourself a legitimate chance to steal the win that you nearly stole last week. There have been some struggles with getting into the end zone on Michigan's end here, especially going through 4 different quarterbacks this season. Consistency at the most important position has been a big problem for them. And with that, I do think that if you can come in and go after this team, be aggressive, especially on third down, and win on third down. You have not been great there. That seems to be the biggest issue for Houston, is just getting teams off of the football field. If you can win on third down, you have yourself a chance. And Michigan's not necessarily the greatest team on third down. They only convert on about 37% of third down attempts themselves. And again, I know Houston hasn't been great. They're the second worst third down defense in the UFL right now. If you can just win on third down, force Michigan to settle for those field goals, or maybe get them off the field before they get in a position. And I know that Jake Bates' range is like 64 yards at this point now, but if you can try to just keep them in a position where they have to kick those 50-plus yard field goals, at some point, that's supposed to fail, at least as far as like statistics are concerned. At some point, that's not a reliable way to keep gathering points, unless Jake Bates is just on some historic kicking run right now that, I mean, arguably he might be, but at some point, those field goals have to start missing. So you can't keep relying on that, at least as history shows. So if you can win on third down, you could maybe put Michigan in a tough spot here and play that spoiler that you almost did last week. For the Panthers, with 2 games left, I think for them, I really want to see them go with Bryce Perkins here and give him the quarterback 1 title. I think you need to settle on a singular quarterback going into the playoffs here. If you want a legitimate chance at winning the UFL championship, you can't keep doing the QB carousel thing. And I know injuries are a big reason as to why this keeps happening, but Perkins has only missed on 4 of the 22 pass attempts he's had over the last couple of weeks here, racking up 222 yards and a passing touchdown as well. He's got another nearly 70 yards on the ground as well. He has not been given the opportunity to start and finish a football game, but I would be very curious to see what you can do here. And you're going up against a Roughnecks team that's 1-7, while their defense has been solid. I want to see Bryce Perkins get the shot, start from finish, see how it goes. He is, in my opinion, your hottest hand, and I think some people would agree with that. Some others might not, but I do think he is the hottest hand you have going for you right now at the quarterback spot. Roll with him. Give him this opportunity here, start to finish. See what they can do. As of this moment, I don't know what the depth chart is. As of me recording, this is not available. So give him the opportunity, see what he can do. Coupled with running back Matt Colburn finding some serious success over the last couple of weeks. I know you lost Wes Hills last week, and I don't know what the status of him is, but based on him being on crutches last week, I'm not going to anticipate him playing this week. But you have a guy like Matt Colburn in the backfield, a wide receiver in Marcus Sims, who's averaging like 18 yards per reception right now, who can blow for 70 yards at any given moment. You have some really talented pieces around you. Give a guy the opportunity to start to finish, see what he can do, especially this close to the playoffs. On defense, I think for this, it's going to be up to that defensive front to really create the problems that Houston has dealt with all season long. Offensive line has not been a strength, I would say, in Houston. They've definitely struggled in situations here, opening up running lanes. They've allowed 20 sacks on the season, which I believe is 3rd most in the UFL, 3rd or 4th, one of those two. But they're somewhere within that range of closer to the bottom than they are to the top. This is one of those teams that if you can bully them up front, you can find a legitimate opportunity to shut down their offense completely and put them in a spot where Houston has been the worst offense essentially all season long in terms of points per game, yards per game. Like, they don't get a lot done in games, and a lot of it has to do with the struggles along the offensive line. So you got guys like Breland Speaks, Rondell Carter on that defensive line that are basically monsters among men, and I do think that you have a legitimate opportunity to just dominate up front, shut down that Houston offense, and give Bryce Perkins that opportunity without a ton of pressure going up against a Roughnecks team that is, I would say, a bit inferior to where the Panthers are right now, and allow him to get comfortable as that quarterback 1 throughout this game. So one side helping the other side is kind of how I'm looking at this here. And we need to see a more complete game and a little more consistency along Michigan, especially on the offensive side, for me to really feel like they're a threat going in against the Birmingham Stallions. And I know that first game they played was close, but this is a somewhat different team, all things considered, than the first time they played. So you can't really bank on that thought, being that Michigan is being led by a completely different quarterback right now than the first time they played, and that is the most important position on the football field among other players that have had to come in and come out due to various injuries and what have you. These teams are vastly different from the first time they competed. So I want to see some more consistency, especially along the offensive side, so I know going into that game against Birmingham in a couple of weeks that, you know, Michigan knows what they're doing on offense, as opposed to we're just riding this back and forth flip-floppy thing at the quarterback spot. All that aside, though, as for who I think is going to win, I'm going to go Michigan. I'm going to take the Panthers. Safe weekend for me, but I really feel like all the favorites are the favorites for a reason this week, and they should come out victorious. Odds are someone's going to drop the ball, and like I mentioned earlier, I do think that the DC Defenders are a prime candidate to potentially choke that opportunity away, but I think that the favorites this week are very strong as the favorites, and I really like them going into this weekend. So I'll take all the favorites for the wins here. Again, Michigan over Houston, 23-16 to wrap up the weekend. Let me know in that comment section down below. What are you feeling about this weekend's games? Who do you think comes out victorious? But that's it for me as always. If you made it to the end, I greatly appreciate it. I'll see you all next time. Have a good one.